More information has been released recently about the killing of 4 university students at the University of Idaho, but the killer is still at large. On Sunday morning, 4 students were found stabbed to death in their beds near campus. 2 other roommates were at home at the time upstairs, but both were unharmed. It's believed that their deaths occurred around 3 or 4 in the morning, though the 911 call was not placed until the following day. It's also now believed that they were asleep at the time of the attack. Initially, police believed that there was no further threat to the community, but they have since backtracked that. And as of now, they're looking for a K-Bar brand combat blade that they think was used in the attack. A live stream from a food truck actually shows Madison and Kaylee ordering food hours before the attack happened. In the video, this man can actually be seen behind the girls, walking around and looking at them, leading many internet sleuths to believe that he was somehow involved, but he has since been cleared by the police. Police have also released this updated timeline of events showing that Xana and Ethan were at a party and Maddie and Kaylee were getting food that night. A lot of this information has actually been uncovered by Kaylee's sister, who's taken a lot of the investigation into her own hands. And one thing that she wants people to know is that Kaylee called her ex-boyfriend 6 times that night, an hour before the attack happened. Right now, we don't know if that means anything, but it is something that she wanted out there. Classes have not been canceled on campus, but if you choose to not go, you will not be penalized. And if anyone has any tips or information on this case, you can call a tip line at 208-883-7180. Can you tell a place has a dark history just from looking at it? I'm going to show you a listing and we're going to see. Also, this is a series, so follow along. This is the Watts family home in Colorado, where Chris and Shanann Watts lived with their 2 children. Chris Watts is a family annihilator who took the life of his pregnant wife and 2 daughters in 2018. And despite all that, this house actually recently sold. But in the listing that was posted, you can actually see areas that were featured in the police cam footage during the investigation. Because when the crime first happened, Chris pretended he had no idea what happened to his family. But you can see in a lot of this footage, he's acting so suspiciously. So much so that one of his neighbors actually tipped off to police that he thought something was just not right with Chris. We still don't know from Chris exactly why this happened, but we can infer that he wanted to start over a new life with his mistress. Chris is currently in jail, but a new family now lives inside that home. Would you be willing to live in a home like this? This Polish woman is claiming to be the missing Madeleine McCann, but did you know there's age progression photos done of Madeleine that could help us know what she would look like today? In 2007, Madeleine was taken from her family's bedroom while they were on vacation in Portugal. And immediately the parents came under fire because they did leave the kids asleep in the apartment by themselves while they went to dinner with friends. This is the official age progressed photo of Madeleine to age 9, and this is the woman who's now claiming that she is Madeleine. And this woman does have some of Madeleine's signature features. Here you can see a black speck that looks like a pupil in Madeleine's eye, which is something they both share. She's also claiming that she has a lot of missing memories from childhood, but the eye speck does seem to be her most convincing argument. But German prosecutors actually believe that Madeleine is no longer alive. And 2 people believe they saw this man carrying a small girl towards the beach around the time that Madeleine's parents first noticed that she was missing. But that being said, it's not completely impossible that she would be alive today. What is some of the crazy stuff people have confessed to as they're dying? Well, in this series, I'm going to read to you some of the craziest ones I could find. This story comes from a hospice nurse that was dealing with a patient who had fought in the Vietnam War. Early on in his treatment, she actually asked him if he had any siblings, and he mentioned that he did have a brother, but he passed away in Vietnam. He also had a wife who had previously passed away, and because of this, he didn't have a lot of people that would come visit him. The man had dementia, and the nurse said that at times it felt like he was digging deep into his brain to find moments from his life that he could describe to the nurse in vivid detail. So one night the nurse comes in and the man is in really rough shape, like it looks like he's not going to make it through the night. And when she walks in, he starts beckoning her over, like, come here, come here, come here. So the nurse comes over and the man begins to tell her that his brother wasn't killed by an enemy soldier in Vietnam. He had actually killed his brother. And not only that, but these men were twins. So when the brother died, the other one fully assumed his identity when he came back to the States. Meaning that when he came back from the war, he took his brother's entire life, including his wife. The man ended up passing away that night, and later on the nurse told his daughter what she had heard. And the daughter did not believe her at all, but then years later, she finds a handwritten confession from her father stuffed in a Bible. What are some of the craziest things that people have confessed to at the end of their lives? Well, in this series, I'm going to show you some of the wildest stories I found. And I cover all sorts of spooky and true crime stuff on this page, so make sure you follow along. So this story comes from a woman who was helping her mother at the end of her mother's life. The woman actually lived in Europe, but her mom lived in China, so when she got the call that her mother wasn't doing very well, she made the long journey all the way back. And right when she gets there, her mother asks all the doctors and nurses to leave the room. She apparently wanted to be absolutely alone with her daughter. So the daughter's like, "What's up? Are you okay?" and the mom tells her she knows she doesn't have a lot of time left, so there's something she really wants to tell her. Her mother proceeds to tell her that she's not actually her biological mother. And obviously this comes as like a huge shock to the daughter, but it's nothing compared to what came next. The mother proceeds to tell her that when she was younger, she really wanted to have her own kids, but unfortunately she just wasn't able to get pregnant. And not only that, but she didn't have a lot of money, so going through an adoption agency wasn't necessarily an option. So she actually bought the daughter off the black market for adopted children in China, meaning she didn't know if the daughter's adopted parents gave her up willingly or if someone had taken her to put her on the black market. The mother actually passed away just shortly after that, and we haven't gotten any update from the poster if she got any more information on her biological family. Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? I'm going to show you a police sketch from the Alec Murdaugh case, and we're going to see. And I cover all sorts of spooky and true crime stuff on this page, so follow along. This is a sketch of the man that Alec Murdaugh claims shot him on September 4th, 2021. And for those that don't know, Alec Murdaugh is on trial right now for the summer 2021 slaying of his wife and son. Alec claimed that he wasn't home at the time that his wife and child were murdered, but a Snapchat taken by his son just 5 minutes before his death proved that Alec was at the scene of the crime. And just a few months after the murders, Alec said that he had pulled his car over on the side of the road when this man pulled up and shot him. But this man doesn't exist. Alec completely fabricated the description of the man for police. Alec was actually shot, but what happened was he hired this man to do it. And the reasoning behind it is wild. Alec claimed that he couldn't handle the loss of his wife and son, so he hired this man to take his life. And that way too, if he lost his life, his other son would get the $10 million life insurance policy on him. But Alec had been writing that man checks for small amounts for the months leading up to the event. That man was a handyman on the Murdaugh property, but what Alec was trying to do, it's believed, was make him look like he was Alec's drug dealer. And that way, if he shot Alec, it would also look like that was the man that shot his wife and son. So we'll never know how accurate the police sketch is because this man is not real. But if you're following the case, what do you think? What are some of the craziest things people have confessed to at the end of their lives? In this series, I'm sharing some of the craziest ones I found. And I cover all sorts of spooky and true crime stuff, so follow along. So in 2004, Geraldine Kelly was dying of cancer. Her daughter was there by her side, but this was particularly hard on her daughter because her father, Geraldine's husband, had passed away in a motor vehicle accident years prior. Or at least that's what Geraldine had told everyone. A few days before Geraldine passed away, she tells her daughter that she lied about how her husband died. He didn't die in an accident. Geraldine had killed him. And not only that, but she was keeping his body in a freezer in a storage unit. So her daughter calls the police right away, and sure enough, he's in an unplugged freezer that was taped shut. Geraldine claimed that she had been a victim of abuse, but she passed away a few days later along with any information she had on this case. Some people don't know the university they went to is actually haunted. As is the case with Cal State Channel Islands, one of the most haunted universities in America. That's because from 1933 to 1997, it was actually the Camarillo State Hospital, a mental asylum. The biggest one in America at that. It was often referred to as a warehouse for the mentally ill. Inside, patients were subjected to forced labor, shock therapy, and it was one of the first places in all of America to practice eugenics. In 1997, the asylum quickly closed its doors and was very hastily converted into a university. And that's what it remains today, except some of the parts are still around from the insane asylum. This week on my podcast, Heart Starts Pounding, I talked to someone who went inside the building and came face to face with something evil in the morgue. Click the link in my bio to hear it streaming exclusively on Amazon Music this week. And if you don't have a subscription, don't worry. Just click getamazonmusic.com/heartstartspounding for a free trial today. How did these people just disappear into thin air? So in 1900, a boat was carrying a man named Joseph Moore to an island in the Flannan Isles, where he was set to replace 3 lighthouse keepers. Except when he got there, the 3 men were nowhere to be found, and it looked like they left in a hurry. Half-eaten food was still on the table, and one of the men had left their coat behind. Interesting to note that the kitchen clock had also stopped working. After a full investigation, the men were never found, but a captain's log was retrieved. The men had actually written about a storm 3 days prior, but no one else in the area had reported there being a storm. They also mentioned in the log that the storm had passed, so that wouldn't have been the cause of their deaths. But the log had other concerning information in it, like the fact that their mental health was starting to deteriorate. But there was no sign of struggle, no sign of foul play, just an empty lighthouse. It's been 120 years and no sign of the men has ever been found. The leading theory is that a wave had swept them away, but at the time the sea was calm. And it's kind of hard to believe that 3 expert lighthousemen were swept away in a wave. We'll probably never know what happened. Have you heard about this foreign streaming service that people are claiming is like the darkest? I don't know about you, but the scariest TV shows and movies are almost always foreign. And I recently found this Nordic streaming service that was not available in the US. But now it is, and it has some true crime stories that have been like keeping me up at night. Like the story of Lisa Holm, who was a teenager in Sweden working at a cafe when she never made it home one night. She had just texted her father that she was heading home on her moped, but when she never showed up that night, he actually drove to her work and found that her moped was still in the parking lot with the keys in the ignition. And no one inside had seen what happened to her between the entrance to the cafe and her moped. And then when the police are called, they start finding some of her belongings, leading them like breadcrumbs to this shed up here. And that's where they ultimately find Lisa's body crammed into a locker. And this is the crazy part, but beforehand, there was a guy in the search party looking for Lisa who was telling volunteers beforehand to not look in this specific shed. So the police think that there's something weird with this guy, so they bring him in for questioning, and during the investigation, they find thousands of images and videos on his computer of like extreme violence against women. His name was Nergis Belavicius, and he was eventually convicted of Lisa's murder. And this was actually an episode in Crime Scene Sweden, which is a show about murders that just wrecked the country. There's tons of other shows I haven't heard of that I'm actually really digging, so I'm gonna include a link in my bio for you to check it out and let me know what you watch. You have to be careful picking up stuff off the ground. So in the early 1960s, a family of 4 moved into a house in Mexico City. And one day the 10-year-old son is playing out in the yard when he sees something small and shiny on the ground. He doesn't really think anything of it, he just picks it up and puts it in his left pant pocket. But then over the next couple days, the boy starts getting sicker and sicker, and the skin on his left side near his pocket is starting to burn. His mom finds a capsule on him and ends up putting it in a kitchen cabinet with a bunch of other glasses. But over time, the glasses start all turning black. Not only that, but the fingernails of everyone in the family also start turning black. The boy and his family start getting sicker and sicker until one by one, most of the family dies. And this all started happening when the capsule came into the house. So what was the thing the boy found on the ground? It was a stray capsule of cobalt-60, which is incredibly radioactive, similar to what fell off a truck in Australia in January. If you want to hear more terrifying stories of radiation, you can check them out on the podcast this week. A woman who was missing for 30 years was just found alive in Puerto Rico. So Patricia Kopta vanished without a trace from her home in Pennsylvania in 1992. The situation surrounding her disappearance was a little strange and scary because Patricia's mental health had been getting worse and worse over the years. So when she disappeared, the police told her younger sister and husband that they thought she left on her own accord and basically closed the case. They thought that she would maybe come back, but then 30 years went by with no phone calls and no contact. Everyone in her life had assumed she passed away. But recently, an 83-year-old woman in an elderly home in Puerto Rico started opening up to a nurse for the first time. The woman had been diagnosed with dementia and started bringing up things in her life that she had never spoken about before. This alarmed one of the nurses at the facility, who contacted authorities to get a DNA test because she started believing that this woman was a missing woman from the United States. And sure enough, it was Patricia. She had never told anyone about her previous life and had never contacted her family. Her husband and sister were contacted because they're still alive, and they were shocked. Now that I've seen it, I can't unsee it. So the other day, a Reddit user posted this photo to Reddit. It's of his apartment at night. He had been complaining of hearing rustling noises in his apartment over the last couple nights. Many users thought they could kind of see something in this area of his kitchen, but I couldn't, so I looked at the brightened version. This is the photo brightened. And I know what you're gonna say, yes, it does look like Keanu Reeves, but look at how tall he is compared to the fridge. But it gets so much worse. This is a video he took of his apartment at night where you can see something happen to the light in the kitchen. But let's look at the brightened version. Yes, it's terrifying, but is it a ghost? What are some of the craziest things people have confessed to at the end of their lives? Well, in this series, I'm sharing some of the wildest ones I found. And I cover lots of spooky and true crime stuff on this page, so follow along. This one comes from a man whose uncle was in a really devastating car accident. He had sustained life-threatening injuries, and the EMTs knew they had to act fast. Apparently, the uncle knew things were not looking well, so he beckoned the EMT closer. He had something he wanted to say. And so the EMT leans in really close, and the uncle says, "Tell my wife Wendy is my daughter." So who is Wendy? Well, apparently, Wendy was the neighbor's 4-year-old daughter. The man did end up passing away from his injuries, and the word did get to Wendy's family. The parents divorced, but apparently the poster writes that the legal dad is still very much a part of Wendy's life. I think I would have taken that secret with me. And if you've been enjoying this series, you'll love the full podcast episode I did on them. Did you hear that AI may have found alien communication? So there's an organization called SETI that collects data on radio transmissions that are coming into Earth's atmosphere. They're looking for non-Earth-based techno-signatures that they believe could come from extraterrestrials. But over the last few decades, they haven't really found much. There's no doubt that these radio transmissions exist, but a lot of them are just coming from stars as they pulsate, and a lot of the transmissions just kind of get jumbled up with the radio transmissions that are coming from Earth. But recently, they implemented AI to sort through the data and to clean it up, and the AI found something. The AI found 8 techno-signatures hidden in the radio transmissions that it believes could be from extraterrestrials. Right now, it's not exactly clear what these techno-signatures are, if it's alien tech or if it's aliens trying to communicate with us. But researchers are saying that the best case scenario is that these transmissions contain information on alien civilizations. What are some of the strangest ways that police have tried to catch a killer? Well, in 1860, the body of 3-year-old Seville Kent was found at the bottom of an outhouse. But there was something very strange found next to his body. There was a woman's bra. So police decided that they were going to make all of the women that lived inside the Kent estate try on the bra and then convict the woman who it fit best. And even stranger than that was who fit into the bra. It was the boy's nanny. The whole story is full of so many twists and turns and juicy gossip that I had to cover the whole thing on the podcast this week. It's maybe the only time a woman's gone on trial for the fit of a bra. H.H. Holmes might be one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. But how did he get away with killing for so long? Holmes had actually built a hotel for travelers visiting the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. And he carefully constructed it to be able to conceal his dark intentions with his guests. See, Holmes had a large vault in the middle of his hotel, and he would trick women to go inside by asking them to grab him some papers. He would then pump gas into the vault to asphyxiate them. There were also stairs and hallways that went to nowhere, giving the hotel a maze-like feel. Holmes targeted women just in town for the weekend, knowing no one would look for them. Holmes confessed to 27 murders, but historians are convinced that there's more. Victims included 3 mistresses, the child of a mistress, and all 3 of his business partner's kids. I think these people captured a ghost in their live photo. So here we are, everything's looking normal, but then when you press it, what is that? I'll show it again in slow motion, but look, behind this boy, it's something on all fours. It feels demonic. There's something there. A body was just found in a barrel in Lake Mead, dating back 40 years, and it's believed we're gonna find a lot more. The lake is having the worst drought in 1,200 years, and so when this body was originally dumped, it could have been under 200 feet of water. For reference, Lake Mead is just outside of Las Vegas, meaning that it has been a dumping ground for mob activity for decades. Around the time the body was dumped, the most prevalent gang in Las Vegas was actually the Hole in the Wall gang, led by Frank Cullotta. Frank actually died in 2020, so if his gang was responsible for this death, we may never know. The police think that the body was dumped in the 70s or early 80s, and that the person died from a gunshot wound before being placed in the barrel. They were actually able to date the body because they found Kmart shoes sold around that time inside of the barrel. According to police reports, about 1 or 2 bodies are found per year inside of Lake Mead, so if this is drying up this fast, we might be about to find a lot more. When I was 5, I was groomed by a future murderer. My family and I had a caravan in a holiday park in New South Wales. We would go there every school holiday, and I have a lot of fond memories of this place. But other memories are not as good. The people who owned the caravan park had a son, and he was about 25 years old. He would drive around the park and collect everyone's trash in a tractor and do other odd jobs to help out around the park. Every once in a while, he would pull up when I was playing out front and ask if I wanted a ride on the tractor. Of course, I said yes, but this was also back in the day where parents would let kids just play in the street with no supervision. So one day, he dropped me off back at our van, and my dad comes storming out, yanks me by the arm off the tractor, and pulls me inside. And he screams at me saying, "You are never allowed to hang out with that boy ever again." And I start crying, and I'm saying, "He's nice, he gives me lollipops." I couldn't understand why my dad didn't want me hanging out with the nice man that gave me lollipops and let me ride on his tractor. Fast forward like 14 years, my family and I are watching TV one night when the man's face flashes across the screen. He had taken the lives of 2 people and was now serving time in prison. And the worst part, He used pills on the people that he would call his lollies. People now think there's drone footage that confirms that this ghost is real. Oh my god. So since the 1980s, locals in Cannock Chase in the UK have claimed to see the ghost of a black-eyed little girl in the woods. Multiple witnesses have reported seeing a little girl with soulless black eyes and a crooked neck popping out of the woods. Some say she's searching for her mother, and others say that she feels demonic. But now reports are saying that a drone may have caught a photo of her. This is the image that was captured this week, and people are saying they think this is the girl. Here's a close-up image of it where you can see her hair, you can see her crooked neck, and you can see the black eyes. But what do you think? Is it her? Have you heard this scary radio transmission people have been hearing? So Mark Connolly was in Grand Rapids last week when he heard something strange come over his radio that interrupted the music he was listening to. He described it as a man's voice but really low and just humming a simple tune that Mark had never heard before. It lasted like 3 seconds, but Mark said his dogs were freaking out when it came on. So Mark does what anyone does, and he goes to the internet where he finds a Reddit thread from 2010 of another woman saying that she heard the exact same thing he did. That was the only thread he could find on the entire internet of someone hearing exactly what Mark had heard, and no one had replied to her Reddit thread. He also noticed that she stopped posting 3 weeks after she reported hearing the noise, and she had been posting like a lot before that. But now when you look it up, like 4 people within the last week have heard this noise all throughout the Midwest. And still, no one knows what it is, but they all say that it comes over usually a car radio around 11:30 at night. Erica's family told her they were going on vacation in Lake Tahoe, when in reality they were dropping her off at a Troubled Teen Wilderness program that she would not survive. Erica Harvey was just 15 years old when she was dropped off at the Catherine Freer Wilderness program. The program promised Erica's family that they could get her off drugs, but the staff were not trained very well. The first day that she was there, the kids all went on a really long hike, and Erica started showing symptoms of dehydration. Erica was also on antipsychotic medication, which was something the staff did not have any experience with. So when she started speaking gibberish and her eyes rolled into the back of her head, they thought she was being dramatic. And when she fell over backwards into a ravine, they completely ignored her. Finally, after an hour, they went to go check on her, but Erica didn't have a pulse. The staff called a medical helicopter, but they didn't know where they were, so they gave them the wrong coordinates. By the time Erica saw a doctor, it was 5 hours later, and she didn't have a chance. And programs like Erica's still exist today, trapping kids like prisoners because they're minors and can't sign themselves out. This week I interview a survivor who was gone for 3.5 years in the troubled teen industry because she was 14 years old when she was taken. A prisoner and a prison guard in Alabama just escaped together, leaving many to wonder if it was planned or if she was kidnapped. So last Friday, Casey White and Vicky White disappeared from an Alabama jail. Vicky was bringing Casey to a courthouse for a routine mental health check, but they have not been seen since. For reference, Casey was actually in jail for a crime spree he committed in 2015, and while he was in jail, he also confessed to the murder of a 58-year-old woman, also in 2015. So there's actually reason to believe that the two were in a relationship at the time of the disappearance. Vicky was giving Casey preferential treatment in the prison and also may have had him specifically transferred to her prison so they could be together. Vicky also was set to retire the day of the disappearance and had just sold her house for way under market value. Casey, on the other hand, claimed that if he ever got out of prison, he would kill his ex-girlfriend and his ex-girlfriend's sister, and now he has access to Vicky's weapons. Personally, I think that Casey got Vicky to fall in love with him so that she would help him escape. And he feels really dangerous, so hopefully both of them are found within the next couple days. Hello everyone. Today we have a video of someone walking through an abandoned hospital, which I'm too scared to watch. Okay. Okay, what was that? Okay, one more time with my head out of the way. I'm sorry, but that looks like a straight up demon. See if you can spot the ghost in this abandoned insane asylum in the UK. One more time in case you missed it. Oh my god. At first I thought maybe they got one of their friends to go in and pretend, but that looks ghostly. Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? I'm going to show you a sketch, then the person, and we're going to see. And this is part of a series, so make sure you follow along. This is the Unabomber, probably the most famous police sketch ever drawn. And this is what was seen in 1987 by the only woman to ever see him in action. He'd go on to mail 16 bombs across the country over the course of 18 years. And this is a picture of a young Ted Kaczynski, the man that did it. The Unabomber was incredibly hard to catch because he lived in this shed and was a total recluse. It was actually his brother's wife that suggested that Ted was the Unabomber because she recognized his writing style in a letter that he had written to authorities. Thank God for observant women, and let me know if there's anyone else you want to see. Working overnight at a hospital sounds terrifying. A few years ago, a woman was working an overnight shift in the dementia ward of a hospital, and she went to go check in on one of her patients who had aphasia, which means that she couldn't speak. But it seemed like the older woman was trying to communicate something to the nurse. And the nurse got a really bad vibe. She's like, okay, something's clearly wrong here. When all of a sudden the woman with aphasia starts shaking, she looks terrified and she points at something behind the nurse. But when the nurse turned around, there was nothing behind her. The nurse is terrified, but she finishes her shift. She has to clock out downstairs in the basement of the hospital, and it's like 3 a.m. at this point. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she hears this clanging noise. So she peers around the corner into the hallway, and there's just a knife laying in the middle of the hallway. No explanation. I actually shared this scary story and a bunch of other hospital-related scary stories in this week's episode of the podcast. Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? I'm going to show you someone who committed a crime and then a sketch, and we're going to see. And this is a series, so follow along for more. So in 1971, John List annihilated his entire family. John had recently lost his job, but for a while he was pretending that he still had a job. He would leave his house in the mornings, but would spend the whole day just reading and not being at work. He knew his family would eventually catch on, so on November 9th, very slowly and methodically, one by one, he took the lives of his mother, his wife, and all 3 of his children. And then he disappeared to start a new life. That is, until 18 years later, when Frank Bender, a police sketch artist, debuted this clay bust of what he thought John would look like at this time on America's Most Wanted. He age progressed John 18 years from the last time he had been seen, and he even got his glasses right. The bust was so accurate that a man named Robert Clark would be arrested in Denver because his neighbors called in a tip to the FBI. John had been living under that name for 18 years. Do you remember the story of the adult woman who was pretending to be a child in order to get adopted? Well, the story is so much crazier than that. In 2010, the Barnett family adopted Natalia Grace, a 6-year-old girl from Ukraine. But shortly after the adoption, the family claimed that Natalia wasn't who she said she was. She couldn't speak any Ukrainian, which the family thought was weird, but she was also showing signs of being post-puberty, meaning she probably wasn't 6 years old. So the parents got a bone density test done on her, and the doctor said that she was at least 14, if not older. And on top of that, her behavior was starting to become menacing. She would stand over the parents' beds at night saying she was just waiting for the right time, and she threatened violence against the 3 other sons. One time she even tried to poison the mother. But what do the parents do? They get her age legally changed to 22 years old, rent her an apartment, and leave her in it by herself. They thought they were escaping a murderer, but many believe that they abandoned a disabled child. There's so many twists and turns to this story, and I do a whole deep dive on my podcast this week. Hi dolls, welcome back to the series Celebrities You Didn't Know Were Kidnapped. Today we're going to be talking about the bizarre kidnapping of Frank Sinatra's son, Frank Sinatra Jr. So Frank Sinatra Jr. was just 19 years old in 1963, and he was an up-and-coming singer, probably wanting to be like his dad. He was performing at a lodge in Tahoe when 2 men approached his room saying that they were delivering a package. Within minutes, the men had tied up the singer's friend and blindfolded Frank Jr., leading him out a side door into a car. The singer's friend was able to untie himself pretty quickly, but by that point, Frank Jr. was already in a car heading 400 miles south to LA with the kidnappers. So these are the 2 guys that kidnapped him, and this guy, John Irwin, was the one that called Frank Sinatra Sr. that night, demanding $240,000 for his son's return. And to put that in perspective, that's like $2.2 million today. The FBI oversaw the transaction, and Frank Jr. was released after the ransom was paid. But it kind of gets a little weirder after that. So a lot of people still today think that this was just a publicity stunt because one of the kidnappers, Barry Keenan, knew the Sinatras and was like close with the family. He was Nancy Sinatra's friend at UCLA, and he saw this as an opportunity to borrow money from Frank Sinatra, fully intending to pay it back one day after he opened a business. He went to jail for 4 years for the kidnapping, but is still alive today and started a really successful real estate business and is worth millions of dollars. He also talks very publicly and often about the kidnapping. Stay tuned for more stories. Hello, and welcome back to Celebrities You Didn't Know Were Kidnapped. So this is actually one of the scariest celebrity kidnapping stories I've ever heard. Today we're talking about Justin Long. This story takes place in 2007 when Justin was filming a movie in Birmingham, Alabama. Justin was out at a local bar after filming with some of the crew when he was approached by two local men. The men offered to take Justin and the production assistants to a casino, but insisted that they all drive together in their car. Justin actually didn't think much of this and agreed to go with them, but first wanted to go back to his hotel room to get some more money to gamble with. So he goes, grabs the money, gets back in the car with the guys, and the guys say that they need to make a pit stop at their house. And while they're at the house, one of them offers Justin some weed, and he takes one hit and realizes it's not weed. He starts immediately feeling like he's losing control of his body, and when he offers it back to the men, they don't want to smoke it. And it's at this point too that another man comes out of one of the rooms, goes, "That's the guy," grab the camera, and then they're all back in the car again. At this point, Justin's at least with it enough to know that they're not bringing him back to his hotel even though he's begging them to. At one point, they actually drive him to the hotel but don't let him get out and then drive away from it, sort of to like taunt him or to try to calm him down or something. He knows that things are starting to look really dire and gets this overwhelming sense that he is going to die. So what he does next is he opens the car door going 30 miles an hour and jumps out of it. And actually, he's so clumsy as he does it, he falls under the car and the car runs over his leg. But he's actually able to still get up and flag down the next car that drives by, which just happened to be a cab. The PAs that he was with were also let go at this point, and to this day he has nerve damage, but obviously it could have been so much worse. Make sure you're following along for more in this series. Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? I'm going to show you some sketches, then I'm going to show you the person that was caught, and we're going to see. And I cover all things spooky on this channel, so make sure you follow along. So this photo right here is a police sketch of the original Night Stalker, also known as the Golden State Killer. The Golden State Killer is known for terrorizing California in the 70s and 80s. So it took a really long time for them to be able to catch the Golden State Killer, and part of the reason is they thought that he was two different killers at first. They thought it was one person who was responsible for a bunch of SAs that were happening in Northern California, and then a separate person that years later was responsible for taking people's lives. But DNA evidence proved that it was one man, and these are some sketches of him. One thing that really stands out to me is this like all-American kind of boy next door look that he almost has. In 2018, DNA evidence proved that it was Joseph DeAngelo who was the Golden State Killer, but let's look at some pictures of him when he was younger. The other photos to me don't look as similar, but this is spot on to me. There's so many little details in this photo that are correct, from the swoopy hair to the chubby cheeks and the thin lips. Like even the ears look identical. And you'll notice here that he is in a cop uniform because he was a cop, which is something that they figured because of the nature of his crimes. One thing that he would do to victims was he would wake them up by shining a flashlight into their eyes, which is something that the police would use to disorient people that they were arresting. Ultimately, it was DNA evidence from a genealogical database that put him away, but I'm a little bit surprised they didn't catch him based on the sketch because it looks so similar to me. Welcome to another installation of killers that got caught because they're idiots. Today we're talking about the guy that tried to kidnap a barista in Washington on Monday. And while he's not a killer and it's unclear if that was his intention, he's still an idiot, so he's on the list. In this video, you can see here where Matthew Darnell tried to kidnap a barista by pulling her through the small drive-through window. It's unclear why he thought that would work, but thank God it was his plan because the barista was basically uninjured in the whole ordeal. Let's now take a look at this large and identifiable tattoo that says Chevrolet in cursive that ultimately helped the police identify Matthew. I'm not here to tattoo shame anyone, but maybe don't commit a crime where the only two parts of you caught on security footage are your face and a hyper-specific tattoo that is unique to you. Also, as he's leaving, he stops here, and I don't know if that's to collect the $5 in loose change that she dropped. But as he's leaving, we get a really great glimpse of the back of his truck and his license plate, which also helped the police identify him. Matthew is currently being held on a $500,000 bail, but let's hope he never gets out. Killers that got caught for being stupid, part 3. And then this is a series I've been doing, so make sure you follow along. I just felt like I had to make this video, but we're going to talk about this guy right here. I remember when the Idaho tragedy first happened, there was this idea going around online that some criminal mastermind had done this, that it was a serial offender that was never going to get caught. When in reality, no, it was just done by this dumbass. And you could tell that he thinks he's the smartest guy ever, but we're here to knock him down a peg. For one, Brian had his phone on him the entire time he was casing the house leading up to the crime and for most of the night he committed the crime. And when the cops got his phone records, he literally drew a map of him driving straight to the crime scene that night. And the reason the cops had enough evidence to grab his phone records was he left part of the weapon he used in the house that night in a room that he locked behind him. So even if he did realize he had left it there was no way for him to retrieve it. And he walked straight past one of the surviving roommates, somehow without seeing her, and she was able to give an exact description of him to the police. And the police went to go question Brian because they knew he drove a white Elantra, but the first thing they noticed was that he had the bushy eyebrows that the roommate described the person in the house having. So the next time you see his stupid photo and hear, oh, he was a PhD student, he was learning how to commit the perfect crime, no. This is why these old cathedrals freak me out. So in Loudun, France in the 1600s, there was this cathedral. And one day, all of the nuns that worked there were complaining about having the same nightmare. All of them were seeing this shadowy figure that they referred to as the Cloth Man. He would appear angelic at first, but then would quickly turn demonic. This was terrifying the nuns, but it started getting so much worse. See, after these nightmares started happening, the nuns started showing symptoms of demonic possession. Mass hysteria broke out, and some of the nuns were able to bend over backwards so their shoulders were touching their ankles. It was also said that others were caught levitating. But these nuns thought they knew who was doing this to them. The head priest at this cathedral was a man by the name of Father Grandier, and he was accused of practicing black magic. He was eventually burned at the stake, but they were not able to exorcise the demons out of the nuns. And in fact, many of the men who tried to perform exorcisms suffered horrible fates, even claiming that Grandier's ghost was tormenting them from beyond the grave. Hi guys, welcome back to the series Celebrities You Didn't Know Were Kidnapped. Today we're talking about a highly requested one. This is the kidnapping of Benedict Cumberbatch. So in 2004, Benedict was filming in South Africa, a show for the BBC. So on the weekends, him and his castmates would go out and scuba dive, but this one particular weekend, Benedict wasn't feeling very well and he wanted to go home early. This would have required the group to leave at night, and the South African local that was with them said that leaving at night wasn't a great idea because the roads get really sketchy, but they ultimately decided to leave that very evening. As they're traveling back to set, they blow a tire and have to pull over to the side of the road and change it. And that's when a group of armed men storm out of the brush and completely ambush the group. It was a 2.5-hour ordeal that included bringing all of the actors to an ATM to pull out a bunch of cash. At one point, one of the assailants actually put Benedict in the trunk of the car, but he was able to talk his way out of it. He claimed that he would probably die in the trunk, and that was going to be way too much of a hassle for the assailants. So they pull Cumberbatch out of the trunk, tie the group together, and take off. And at that point, the actors are able to kind of make their way down the road and find someone to help them. And then the next day, they found out that someone that very night actually died in a very similar attack. So for how absolutely terrible the situation was, it could have been a lot worse. Make sure you're following along for more in this series. So this week it came out that Kristin Chenoweth was almost a victim of the Girl Scout murders. This is going to be part of a new series called Close Encounters about people who narrowly escaped a horrible fate, so follow along for more. Some quick backstory is in 1977, 3 girls were found murdered on their first night at Girl Scout camp in Oklahoma. They were all staying in a tent together, and their bodies were found on the trail leading to the camp showers. Now, in 1977, there was no way to test for DNA evidence, but a local man, Jean Leroy Hart, had actually escaped prison and was on the run. He was arrested for the murders, but was acquitted by a jury. There was actually a note found on the campgrounds 2 months earlier that said, "We are on a mission to kill 3 girls in Tent 1, but that note was discarded by the camp director, thinking it was a prank. Now, Broadway actress Kristin Chenoweth was actually supposed to be on that trip. She fell ill that weekend and was unable to go, but she says that it's haunted her entire life. So it wasn't until this year, 45 years after the murders took place, that we might finally have enough DNA evidence to convict Jean Leroy Hart. He passed away in 1979, but this might at least give some closure to the families. Hulu just released a documentary called Keeper of the Ashes about this entire event. Let me know if you're going to watch this weekend.